Good evening, Daytona. I'm Jessica Fendress. I'm your Coastal Director for Volusia County. I have been in Volusia County for almost 10 years. I manage everything from the operation of your beaches, the trash, the tolls, the parking, the walkovers, the ramps, the parks, the inlet parks, the artificial reefs. And we are here today to talk about our feasibility assessment. We also have Dr. Bender, who is Vice President of Coastal Engineering at Taylor Engineering. He has 22 years with Taylor, and he has a PhD in coastal engineering from UF, a master's in coastal engineering from UF, and a bachelor's in ocean engineering from the University of Rhode Island. We also have Miss Wendy Laurent. She has been with Volusia County, working with Volusia County's beaches as part of Taylor Engineering for the past 8 years. She has a master's in civil and environmental engineering from the University of Rhode Island and a bachelor's in ocean engineering from the University of Rhode Island. Taylor Engineering is located in Jacksonville, so they are a Florida company. Mr. Bender, or Dr. Bender, lives in the Jacksonville area, as do most of the Taylor staff in the back of the room. So they are local experts. They have been working on Volusia's coastline for over 30 years. So the last time we had a public meeting was February of 2025. And what we did at that public meeting is we kind of went over our storm damages that we sustained from the 22 hurricanes. We talked about shoreline regression, erosion rates, accretion rates, and kind of identified where the hot spots were and went through some of the projects that we had planned at that time. We've also been working on the feasibility study, which is the reason that we're here tonight. We did an economic impact analysis to talk about the economic impact of our beaches to the county as a whole. And then we are also undergoing some sand placement projects since we last met. We are doing the North Beach Sand Placement Project, which currently is underway. That's where we place the beach sand south of Sunglow Pier in Daytona Beach Shores, all the way down to Ponce Inlet. That's in partnership with the Army Corps of Engineers as they dredge the inlet and the intracoastal waterways. That sand was placed south of Sunglow Pier. It was approximately 18 cubic yards per linear foot, and what that was is it was sacrificial sand that basically put sand back into the system. Following the 2022 hurricanes, we lost over 6 million cubic yards of sand. That's a lot. We are only placing about 750,000 back with this project. This is not a beach nourishment project. This is purely a sand placement project. For perspective, this project that we just are working on is 18 cubic yards per linear foot. That's about 1 dump truck load per foot of shoreline. A beach nourishment project is designed to withstand a significant storm event and is about 100 cubic yards per linear foot of shoreline. So instead of 1 dump truck per foot, you're looking at 5 dump trucks per foot. So we're happy with the way that the project worked out. All the sand that was on the top in the recreational area has now made its way into the near shore and is still providing protection to our coastline. We are starting off on our South Beach project. That's going to be in New Smyrna Beach, south of Sapphire Avenue. We are taking 550,000 cubic yards of beach quality sand and putting it on the beach, a direct replication of the 2006 sand placement project we did following the 2004 hurricanes. We are taking that sand from Rattlesnake Island, which is a dredge material management area just west of the Ponce de Leon Inlet. We are also going through the design and permitting of the Inlet Shoals to Shores project. The Army Corps of Engineers is only dredging the navigational channels within the inlet and the intercoastal waterway. There's a significant amount of sand outside of the platted navigational channels, approximately 1.75 million cubic yards of sand. That's all beautiful sand that went into the inlet in the 2022 hurricanes. There is no mangroves on top of what we're looking at. It's wonderful sand that just found itself in the inlet and is not in the navigational channel, so nobody has gone after it. We're going to go after it. That sand's going to be placed on the beach from Sunglow Pier north to Grenada, and we should have enough sand remaining to do a major sand project somewhere on our coastline. We're also looking offshore. So what offshore means is off in the Atlantic Ocean. And that 3 to 5 mile mark, we have about 40 million cubic yards of untouched sand. We've got different sand from Flagler Line all the way down to Canaveral. You've got a really crushed coquina up north, followed by this beautiful white hard sand in Daytona that makes us notorious for beach driving. And then when you get down to Bethune Beach and Canaveral, you've got a very shelly, coarse sand as well. Whatever sand we put on the beach has to match the existing sand in that community. If we were to change the sand, you may not be able to have beach driving, or you may completely change the dynamic of the waves in Bethune Beach. So it's critical that we put very similar sand on the beach to what is currently there. We're going offshore. We're going 30 feet deep below the seabed floor, and we are doing sand tests. We're basically taking large core samples of that material, and we're identifying what that sand looks like so we can kind of allocate it towards what part of the beach that sand might be able to be used for. So that's our long-term plan for sustaining our beaches. Today, we're mostly going to talk about the feasibility study and the economic impacts. We're going to pass it off to Chris Bender here shortly. He's going to talk about the risk assessment, where we break our 37 miles of managed coastline into very unique communities. Ponce Inlet is completely different than Daytona Beach. South New Smyrna is completely different than Ormond by the Sea. They have different users. They have different populations. They have different stakeholders. They have different tourism factors. So we're going to talk about that. Then we're going to talk about alternatives analysis. What that means is there's various ways to protect your shoreline. You've probably heard of breakwaters, artificial reefs, groins, maybe not. They're a thing. And then no action and structural relocation. We're going to go over the various alternatives that are historically shown to be positive and working well in the state of Florida and how they relate to our community. And then we're truly here to talk about community engagement. We want to hear from all of our communities on what they want their long-term vision to be. This is not about projects in the next 2 years. This is about what you want your beach to look like for your grandkids. This is your 50-year plan. This is your 75-year plan. We want to know where you want to be in the long term. It takes about 3 years to ramp up on permits and construction for these type of projects. So we need to get it going now so that we can partner with grants so that we don't have to pay the full burden. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Bender.
All right, thank you, and thanks for being here. I got to speak with a few of you at the posters before we started, so I want to point out that while I will go over the risk assessment now, we have more detailed information on the posters in the back for both this component and the next components that we're going to talk to. So if anything's not clear or you want to talk about more in detail, we'll be back there after the presentation. So the first component was this risk assessment that was completed. And right now, the next series of slides will talk about the methods for that. So what we did was we defined vulnerability parameters, and then we evaluated those on a parcel by parcel basis along the entire county. And we took the parcel results in each community to develop a community risk index value. So that community risk index is what comes out of this analysis. The vulnerability parameters that we looked at included three main parameters, as shown there, numbered 1, 2, and 3. The first one being shoreline encroachment. This was a way to look at the distance between the mean high water shoreline, which is think of the average of the 2 high tides each day taken over a long period of time, and we compared that to where the infrastructure, that specific parcel, was located. So that's a horizontal distance. The larger the distance, the less vulnerable that piece of infrastructure was. The second component was an infrastructure exposure that looked in the vertical. So that was taking the elevation of the infrastructure at each parcel and comparing that to a U.S. Army Corps of Engineers statistical water level that was developed doing a lot of storm surge simulations, once again by the Army Corps. But the point being, we looked at what's the difference between that estimated storm surge level and where the infrastructure is at that parcel. The bigger the elevation difference, the less vulnerable that specific parcel would be. The last component was a historical erosion rate. For that, we looked back to 2016. All the data that's been collected by the county every 1,000 feet from the dune out to about negative 30 feet. We had the shoreline position calculated for each of those surveys. We used a technique called linear regression to estimate the shoreline change in feet per year. And what we found was since 2016, across the county, the average was 8.5 feet per year of erosion. However, some communities had values over 12 feet. And so that value was also included within the vulnerability analysis once again, on a community-by-community basis. Some other factors that we considered included armoring presence, modeling results that were provided to us from the S-Beach model that looked at how the profile responded to different storms, and then some community demographic information. So digging in a little bit about the details of what this looked like when we did it. So we have able to see different parcels identified with their infrastructure on them. Here's some condos, some homes, a road, and for each of those specific assets, we looked at and then defined how far they were from that mean high water shoreline. That provided that first parameter, or that horizontal buffer distance. We also knew the elevation of each asset. We compared the elevation with that Army Corps of Engineers stormwater level to determine the vertical buffer, or that vertical offset. And then lastly, we had the shoreline change rate along the entire county shoreline. So that was that third main component that was used. For the analysis, we used 2024 post-Hurricane Milton data that was current as well as very resolved, so it provided a good data source to use for all these analyses. All right, so how did this all come together? And I'll show you the main results here in a minute after I walk you through what's in the table. So we have the communities from north to south identified over here in the first column, and then across the top in blue, we have those vulnerability parameters that were assessed on a community-by-community basis based on the results from the parcel-by-parcel analysis within each community. For each box, we assigned a score based on the risk level. 1 means low risk, 3 means high risk. So therefore, the higher the number of points that a community ended up with indicates a higher level of risk. And then we had 3 main parameters that we considered. Those were applied a weight of 5 since we felt those were the most important. And then 2 of the parameters, the armoring exposure and the S-Beach model results, they were considered important but not to the same degree, so they had a lower weight when we ultimately calculated the risk score for each community. All right, so digging in, now we can see the analysis and the results. So red areas indicate a higher level of risk, while green areas indicate a lower level of risk. You can move across the table to see the results by community, or up and down to look at the results based on an individual parameter within the analysis. Ultimately, we ended up with risk scores for each community. Remember, a higher number indicates increased risk, and then that allowed us to develop ranks for each community. Sorry, going backwards. Where Daytona Beach and Daytona Beach Shores and Wilbur by the Sea tied for the highest risk communities. And then Silver Sands and Methuen Beach came in third. New Smyrna Beach South was 4th ranked in terms of the risk. So this allows the community to understand which communities are most vulnerable and also why they're most vulnerable. The next part of the study evaluated shoreline alternatives. For this, we looked at beach management alternatives that have been applied in Florida. We know that they're permittable, there are possible solutions, and we looked at their applicability to the county shoreline reaches, and importantly, the objectives that were set by the county in terms of what they wanted these alternatives to do. 10 alternatives were evaluated as listed in the middle. And on the bottom, we just have a few examples. Back on the posters, we have detailed information across all 10, including benefits and drawbacks, how well they meet the objectives. We don't have time to go into that now, but if you have questions on any specific alternative, we'll be back there afterward to answer. No action on the left is a do-nothing approach. Beach nourishment is a non-structural method. And then we also had structural alternatives, such as a breakwater, just as one example. All right, I'll pass it over to Wendy.
Thank you. So in order to determine which shoreline alternatives are best suited for the county shoreline, we first compiled background information about each one of these 10 alternatives. So that included things such as what are their functions? Each one has a different primary function associated with it. What are benefits and drawbacks? What are the risks and uncertainty? There are varying magnitudes of risk and uncertainty associated with each one of these solutions, and what is the county willing to take on? Does it have any social considerations on how the communities use these beaches? And is it feasible at a large community-wide scale? We also took into consideration design and maintenance needs, permitting, and costs. So next, we worked with Jessica and her team at the Coastal Division to define objectives associated with this study. The first of which is to reduce storm damages to structures, critical infrastructure, and cultural resources. Next, to reduce risk of natural resource loss. So this is the erosion of sand from the beach and the subsequent degradation of habitat. We want to reduce risk to life safety, avoid impacts to recreation. We still want to be able to walk on the beach, bike, drive, be able to swim in the ocean and surf. Those are all very important here. We want to minimize impacts to threatened and endangered species and their habitats. This includes sea turtle nesting habitat, shorebirds, marine mammals, and also comply with federal, state, and local policies and regulations. We need to be able to permit these projects to make them be implemented on the county shoreline. If we can't do that, then why are we looking at them? So these are all very important and help set the foundation for our study in order to meet the county's long-term coastal management goals. So for each one of these 10 alternatives, we ranked how well they contribute to the objective. So they can either fully meet the objective, partially meet, or they do not meet the objective. So let me walk you through this table before we start dissecting the results. Across the top, we have each one of our objectives we set with the county. Right beneath them, we have a weighting. These are weighted differently based on prioritizations. On the left there, we have all 10 of our management alternative options. So for each one of these, using whether or not they met the objective, if they fully met the objective, they got a score of 2 points. Partially met has 1 point, and does not meet 0 points. We then applied a multi-criteria decision analysis approach, which allowed for a maximum point total of 2 points. And this helped us pick out our top 5 alternatives, which we are going to further evaluate and make our preliminary recommendations from. So the first ranked alternative is beach nourishment with 1.85 out of 2 total points. It only does not fully meet the minimize impacts to threatened and endangered species and their habitats due to temporary concerns that might occur during construction. Next, we have structural relocation with 1.5 points. Following closely behind that with 1.45 points is nearshore sand placement. Then tying for that 4th ranked position, we have breakwaters and nearshore artificial reefs with 1.1 points. So another way to look at this data and visualize it, I know it's a lot to take in, is these radar plots. So in the posters, we have a radar plot associated with each one of these 10 alternatives. And the area associated with these plots helps depict how the alternative contributes to each one of these objectives. So a larger area means it is more likely to meet all of the objectives. So if you like this visualization, please visit the posters. They'll also be available online, hopefully next week. Passing it back to Chris to go over these top 5.
All right, so over the next series of slides, what we'll do is we'll take the top 5 ranked alternatives that were scored based on the slide that Wendy just went over, and we'll talk through some of the important aspects of each one. So for beach nourishment, importantly, it has a package of features that none of the other alternatives possesses, and that's why it was the highest ranked and fully met 5 of the 6 objectives on the prior table. So it directly adds sand to the coastal system. As we've mentioned, right now Volusia County's beaches are in a sand-starved condition. There's been a lot of erosion with the recent storms, a loss of around 6 million cubic yards after the 2022 hurricane season. So this will get sand, place it directly on the berm, allow for the development of a dune, and provide the benefits that go along with that. This is increasing recreational space, places to walk, bike, sunbathe, but also drive, which we know is important. And as we'll talk about here in a minute, that is important as it supports tourism within the county, as the beaches are very important. It provides storm protection. So having that buffer of sand when we do have the large storms, that sand buffer will absorb the wave energy. Some of the sand may move offshore and be stored in bars during those storms, but the typical process of the beach erosion and then recovery after the storm will occur when we have calmer periods, and those sandbars move back onshore and then increase the beach berm during that natural process. They improve the beach habitat, providing spots for turtle nesting as well as seabird nesting, which is one of the criteria. And then importantly, they're adaptable for future conditions. So each beach nourishment project would be designed for each community based on the grain size, the berm height, the elevation, the specific aspects of that community. And then if a beach nourishment project is designed and constructed, it will be monitored, that's part of the permitting, for several years afterwards. And if it's found that the beach is either underperforming or maybe overperforming, the next renourishment of that project could have a differing design or an enhanced design in order to improve the performance for the years following. It is important to point out that these are temporary placements of sand. It's going to be sacrificial sand. It will move along the shore as well as cross shore. So when they're designed, there is a specific renourishment interval that is designed, and then how close to that renourishment interval is needed before the next project will depend on how stormy or not stormy it is in the intervening years after construction. The second ranked alternative was structure relocation. This could be seen as maybe a drastic solution. This is taking infrastructure out of harm's way and moving it further inland. So this scored well on certain aspects of the county's criteria related to reducing the risk to infrastructure and life safety. However, as noted, it does have significant challenges when done on a community-wide scale. So the ability to acquire that amount of property and also having places to move enough structures to really move the needle on reducing risk on a community-wide level does have some challenges. And importantly, it also does not directly maintain or enhance the beach resources. So that idea of all those recreational benefits and the storm damage protection of having more sand in the system, this does nothing to address that. Nearshore sand placement was the third ranked alternative. This is a beach nourishment project, but instead of placing material on the dry beach where you see it, it's placed in the nearshore zone, anywhere between 10 and about 20 feet. So what you do in this case is you place the material there. You get storm protection by having a larger bar feature that will break wave energy during storms, and you have the potential for that material to move onshore to provide a wider beach where you would get the recreational benefits, the habitat benefits, and those associated with having more sand on the beach and a wider beach. However, as noted in the middle here, the effectiveness is condition dependent. So while you know you'll have a larger beach bar out there, how fast and how much of it moves onto the beach is completely dependent on the wave conditions and the storm conditions that occur after you place it. So it's much riskier than just placing the material on the beach where you know you directly get those recreational benefits and the higher level of storm protection if the material is placed on the beach. It does cost less generally to place it in the nearshore zone, which is one benefit of it, but then you have a lot more uncertainty associated with how it will perform. Similar to beach nourishment projects, this would have a periodic renourishment interval as well. Coming in a tie for fourth is breakwaters. This is the first structural alternative that we had that's ranked in the top 5. So a breakwater is a structure placed parallel to the shore in anywhere from about 10 to 20 feet of water, comprised typically of rock. And on the open Atlantic coast, these need to be very large rocks because they need to be immobile when you have large storm waves, including those from hurricanes. Otherwise, you're going to spend a lot of money to create your breakwater and have a large storm go by and have it just be rocks placed all over the nearshore zone. They also require a massive footprint, because in order for them to be effective to reduce the wave energy, they have to go high enough up in the water column to trip enough of the waves, and they have side slopes associated with them as well. So the footprint of these is very large. So not only do they require very large rocks, they require a large amount of rock. So as noted in the top bullet, they're generally not practical along open coasts on a community-wide stretch. They're better suited for targeted locations where maybe you have an erosional hotspot or a focusing of waves, and maybe you need a little extra in that smaller area. But if for a community-wide solution, they have a significant cost challenge. Also, they can disrupt the natural sediment transport. They do nothing to add sediment to the system. They may slightly modify the sediment transport, and you might get some accretion behind them in the shadow zone where the wave energy is reduced, but that sediment is just going to come from some other location along your beach, and in that location you'll end up with an erosion signal if you're going to have accretion somewhere else. All right, and then nearshore artificial reefs were the other alternative tied at fourth. These are also structures placed generally parallel to the coast and the offshore. However, their primary goal is for habitat enhancement. So they are designed such as to attract fish or other types of marine organisms out there. And so therefore, they are generally lower in profile than a breakwater, so they provide less shoreline protection than a breakwater. However, they still have to be designed to be large enough so that when the wave energy comes over them, they don't get, moved all over the place in the nearshore zone. So they have some of the challenges of breakwaters, some benefits maybe of some habitat aspects, but they provide less storm protection. Similar to breakwaters, they're more suited for a small targeted application as opposed to being a community-wide solution to the challenges that Volusia County is facing right now. Similarly, they can change the sediment transport local to them, but they're not adding any sand to the system. So in the conditions that Volusia County has right now, that's why they didn't meet as many of the objectives as the higher ranked alternatives. All right, so if we tie everything together across the vulnerability assessment as well as the structural alternative management alternative analyses, we have this slide. On the far left, we have the risk rank for each community. We talked about how that was developed on that parcel by parcel analysis that tied into a community ranking. Then we have each community listed, and on the far right, we have the preliminary recommended management alternative. You'll notice beach and dune restoration is kind of a repetitive solution there. That's because through the ranking of the alternatives, it was the one that scored highest. And when we looked at the individual communities, there was no reason why there was a large difference in terms of the application of that across those communities. What you will notice is there's some aspects or some communities where we know that there's either ongoing or about to start projects. So this beach and dune nourishment project could tie into those communities that have existing projects. For those communities that don't have one of those projects, they would be a kind of a new start. The design would be fresh, and figuring out how to design that project specific to the sediment grain size, the beach features within each individual community. And as Jessica mentioned earlier, these beach nourishment projects are on the scale of around 100 cubic yards per foot, not like some of the smaller emergency projects that have been created recently that are more on the scale of about 18 cubic yards per foot. Down at the bottom, some notes to consider. These designs will vary across the community. This isn't a one-size-fits-all where there'll just be one nourishment project that with the same grain size that would be placed across the county. Each community would have a tailored solution. And then in green, the alternatives may be combined to develop a more robust and adaptive solution. That got to the idea I mentioned a few minutes ago, where if there's a beach nourishment project and maybe there was an area of high erosion, it could be possible a small nearshore reef or maybe a couple of breakwaters later on after some monitoring could be found to provide a better performing project than just any one solution in isolation. So as we think about management for not just a few years, but for decades in the future, it's possible to have alternatives combined together as there's monitoring and evaluation to figure out how to best manage the shoreline along the county. Lots of posters in the back we can talk about if anything wasn't clear, and they even have a little bit more information than what I presented. So now we'll turn it to the last part.
Thank you. So kind of to bring us back on the why we're here again today is we do not have a long-term beach management plan for our coastline. We just don't have one. We're the only one on the east coast of Florida that doesn't have a managed beach. Part of the grant money that we received from the DEP following the 22 hurricanes was for us to go through this process, get a community-focused beach management plan in place so that we can start the work on getting the permits, the sources, and the easements in place to start implementing this plan so that we have a beach as a recreational and storm protective asset in 50 years. We just went over the risk assessment. We broke our coastline up by the various communities. Each community is special and unique. I love all of them. We also went through the various methods of protecting our shoreline, from no action to structural relocation to breakwaters to placing sand on the beach to placing sand on the near shore. So each community is going to have to try and find out what their vision is. Why is this important? Well, let me talk about the economics of our beach real quick. It all comes down to money, right? So before I go into Volusia's specific numbers, and I got a lot of specific numbers, so I'm reading it to you. Bear with me. Before we go into Volusia's specific numbers, I want to put this in a national context. A recent study published last week on Surfline, which is an industry website for finding the surf. If you've never been there, I encourage you to go. It gives you live webcams. It tells you when the tide's going to be high. It tells you when the ocean's going to be high. It tells you which way the wind is blowing and how hard. A recent study published last week on Surfline found that beaches generate $240 billion in annual spending nationwide. $240 billion nationwide in spending. They attract 10 times more visitors than all of our national parks combined in 1 year. Historically, as a nation, we've only invested pennies per beach visit. After hurricanes, well-maintained beaches have been shown to reduce property damages by up to 90%, returning $5 or $6 for every dollar invested in our shoreline. Now, looking at Volusia County specifically, those numbers I just mentioned, they're not national trends. They're our reality right here in Volusia County. I've got the full economic report in the back. If this interests you, if this is up your alley, please take it. I encourage you to look at it. The numbers are great. Dr. Houston conducted a comprehensive economic impact analysis for Volusia County, and what we found validates exactly what we're seeing across the country. Beach tourism contributes $4.3 billion a year to our county's GDP. That's 17% of our total economy. When we compare our tourism from 21 to 23 against the pre-pandemic years of 17 to 19, beach-oriented tourism was 30% higher. Nearly 61 million day trips are made to Volusia County's beaches each year. So if I go to the beach every single day, I contribute 365 day trips to our coastline. 61 million day trips is twice the attendance of all the Florida state parks combined. We have more people visiting our beach every single year than all of our state parks do combined. That's huge. And remember when I said beaches are economic engines? Here in Volusia County, spending by beach-oriented tourists supports more jobs than any other industry. 31,400 jobs from beach tourism alone, compared to 13,000 in education, 12,000 in construction, and 10,000 in manufacturing. These beaches generate 31% of our county's annual sales tax revenue. 31% of all of our sales tax comes from beach-oriented tourism. That equates out to about $28,000 per homesteaded household in our county. just because we have a beach and the public likes to go to it. So when we talk about investing in beach nourishment and coastal resilience, we're not just protecting sand, we're protecting the foundation of our local economy and the livelihoods of thousands of families in this room and across our county. So what do we do next? This is a great presentation. If you really liked it, I know it's dry as tea, but if you really find this stuff interesting, we do have a long format presentation that will be posted on our county website next week. You can dive into this. You can really go into the pros and cons of every one of the 10 alternatives. There's some Q&A in there as well. I encourage you to look at it. Sign up for our newsletter. You'll get the email once it's all posted. All the materials you see on the screen in the back will also all be posted to the website. We encourage you to tell your friends, your community, your church, your social groups, your coworkers. Tell everybody who loves Volusia County's beaches about this, because what we want is as much feedback as possible from not only our residents but also our users. What works for Daytona Beach may be completely different than what works for Ponce Inlet. And we want each community to have a voice, and we don't want one select group to speak for the entire county. So it's important to make your voice heard. This survey will stay open through January, possibly longer. We will send out an email notification when it's getting ready to close. We'll be visiting different groups, stakeholders in the beach of or the management of our beach, and we're going to answer as many questions as we can. I think that's it. Is that the last one? Oh, not it. No, that's it. Once we have our beach management plan identified, we must have a beach management plan in order to partner with the state and a 50-50% participation on implementation of these plans. When our grant money from the hurricanes runs out, we need to partner with the state at 50%. Otherwise, we're going to have to carry the full burden. In order to be eligible to partner, we must have a beach management plan. All right, thank you for your time. I appreciate you guys coming. Tell a neighbor, tell a friend.